That's
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Picture This, another year in Oscars history. The premise of the show, me and Chad, my co-host to my right, we go through every single year in Oscars history. We talk about the nominees that were nominated for Best Picture, and then at the end, we rank them and give our prizes for Best Actor and Actress. But before we do that, we have a bunch of other stuff to get to. But first, let me introduce Chad Webb. Chad, how are you doing? How's your week or month going since we last talked about 1939?
I'm going great. This has actually been pretty chill. I've had a lot of overlapping movies for different things that I do, which is pretty great. So coming off of 1939, doing 10 movies, that was so exhausting. Just a chill month with 5 movies. I don't want to put an adjective before that because I don't want to spoil anything. But I've been watching a lot of great movies this month, and I've just been really excited to just it makes you feel good when you watch a good movie. So, I'm excited to get into 2007.
That's right. So the year 2007, obviously, we will be talking about the movies of 2007, but the Oscar ceremony was in 2008. But before we get to the Oscars themselves and the movies and all that jazz, let's talk about let's set the scene for what 2007 was like, both maybe politically, just pop culture wise, just like what was in the air in 2007 that could have reflected the time period, because we like to look at these movies from a lens of back then, knowing what was going on in the world to then make our opinions about these movies. So Chad, before we get to these 5 movies, which I should mention are Atonement, Juno, Michael Clayton, No Country for Old Men, and There Will Be Blood. Chad, set the scene for what 2007 was like.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have much in the way of history. I have a few bullet points, but I was around 17. You were maybe 9 or something.
Yeah.
So I was in high school and you were elementary school.
Yeah, probably 3rd grade or something. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. So I was going to see some of these in the theater and stuff like that. I didn't have the best taste back then, I'll say that. So I've come to appreciate a lot of these movies, not just these ones nominated, but other ones from the year a lot more. So my tastes were kind of getting a little better. I was working at the movie theater. I'll tell a story about that later. So that was kind of me back in 2007. 2007 was designated the International Heliophysical Year, International Polar Year, and the International Year of Languages. The original iPhone is introduced by Apple CEO Steve Jobs.
Damn.
The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change publishes its 4th report determining humans have very likely predominantly caused climate change. We're pretty sure of it now, even though we still have deniers out there. I don't know if you use this much. I certainly didn't, but the wife did. Tumblr launches this year.
Did not use Tumblr. No, I think that was just
a
little too early for me. Yeah.
Yeah. A total lunar eclipse occurs. I don't think that happens very often. Not sure on the times of that. The Virginia. Another sad piece of news. The Virginia Tech shooting occurs. The UN General Assembly adopts the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which is good news.
Yes, good news.
So there, I can end on some good news there.
Any births, any deaths, any albums?
I do have some births, deaths, albums. Yes, births. I don't know how to pronounce, and I don't know a lot of these names, and I don't know a lot of these people, but I went with a good amount. Choi Ro-woon, Roman Griffin Davis, Kaylee Fleming. Okay, there you go. Kaylee Fleming, Princess Ariane of the Netherlands, Princess Isabella of Denmark, Aubrey Anderson Emmons, Desmond Napoles, Charlie Shotwell, J.D. McCrary, and Mamiji Nishia. I don't know any of those people.
Yeah, I do not know any of them except for Roman Griffin Davis, who of course was JoJo and Jojo Rabbit. So they're really finally starting their careers now. It seems like if they were born in 2007, because what are they now, like 13 years old, something like that, 14 right now. Any unfortunate passings?
I have
from
only two super notable ones that really struck my eye. Anna Nicole Smith.
Okay.
And one of the legendary directors, Ingmar Bergman.
Oh,
and we'll
Ingmar
actually
Bergman.
talk about him in another month coming up. And I've actually set up my redid my set a little bit with some of the albums. I'm a big vinyl collector. I love music. I love albums. I'm a big album guy. That's why I said, hey, let's do some albums every year too. If there are albums, some years might not have any. But yeah, this year was a phenomenal year, not just for movies, but for music and albums.
Yeah.
You have the legendary In Rainbows by Radiohead. And we'll actually talk more about Radiohead a little bit later when we get to these movies, actually. But then you have Sound of Silver by LCD Sound System, another great album. For Emma, Forever Ago by Bon Iver. Boxer by The National. I love The National. Neon Bible by Arcade Fire. That may be my favorite band. That is definitely a great album in my opinion. Favorite Worst Nightmare by Arctic Monkeys. Great British
I've heard of that.
rockers. Oracular Spectacular by MGMT. It's a great dancey album. I love dancing to some of those songs by that band. Strawberry Jam by Animal Collective. Untrue by Burial, which is a great rap album. And then Person Pitch by Panda Bear, which I do have back there. And Panda Bear is actually one of the members of Animal Collective, which is really cool. And he has a great collaboration with Daft Punk that I love to blast when I drive. And I told you about that recently.
Yeah. So those are the albums. And I honestly probably would add also the soundtrack to Juno, because we'll talk about it. But like that soundtrack was popping when we got there.
For sure.
So,
a lot of Belle and Sebastian on there.
Right. A little bit on the actual ceremony of the 80th Academy Awards. So this was the 80th year of the Academy Awards. It was hosted in February 24th, 2008. So obviously for the 2007 movies in 2008 at the Kodak Theater in Hollywood, where it was for quite a while. It was in the Kodak and the Dolby a lot of the last few decades. Jon Stewart was the host. It was his second hosting gig.
Cool.
It was actually the least watched Oscar broadcast since 1974. And to tease next month, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but the Oscars we will be covering next month is 1974 for the movies of 1973. So the year The Exorcist and The Sting were up for Best Picture was actually the least watched Oscar ceremony until this one in 2007.
Wow.
This was the second pair of directors to win Best Director. Obviously, we saw two director brothers win this year. It was the second time it had happened since Jerome Robbins and Robert Wise won for West Side Story, which was a long time before this. So usually it was only a single director, but this year we got two. Daniel Day-Lewis was the 8th person to win Best Actor twice, and he would go on to be the first person to win Best Actor thrice. Marion Cotillard is the 5th person to win for a non-English performance for her performance in La Vie en Rose. She wins Best Actress, and she's the 5th person to do so in a non-English text. This is also in the midst of a writer's strike for the Writers Guild of America, which started in 2007 and went on to February 2008, right before the Oscars started. So they did have to have a backup plan in case people protested and didn't show up to the Oscars because they were part of the writer's strike. They had to prepare what we would do if the writers won. They also had to prepare some actors, because some actors were also in support of the Writers Guild. So they were like, hey, we have all these clips ready from past Oscars to be like a 80th anniversary special rather than an Oscars themselves, because they had to have a backup in case people didn't go up to accept their awards, because they didn't want the show to be an hour long if no one showed up. But eventually they did kind of come to a deal before the Oscars started as to how they would manage. And of course, we do see that everyone was in attendance who won. So that was good. Now, what's interesting to look at for this Oscar ceremony specifically, every year there's usually a favorite to win. This past year was Nomadland. It's usually not a shock who wins Best Picture, except for, some instances like 1998, for example, is like a big shocker, and 2005. But 2007, when we look back at it, we kind of think, oh yeah, it was probably between No Country for Old Men and maybe like There Will Be Blood, because like those are the ones that are more talked about nowadays. But what's really interesting, and I actually have a chart for this, Chad. I'm going to try to screen share. Let's see. Here we go. So I'll screen share that now. Do you see that chart?
I do.
Okay. So let me break this down. So the best things to look at in order to predict an Oscar winner is these 4 awards: the Critics' Choice, Golden Globes, PGA, and BAFTA. And this is the order in which they happened. So we see all 5 of these movies are nominated for Critics' Choice, and No Country for Old Men wins. The Golden Globes happen. All 5 of these movies are nominated, and Atonement wins the Best Drama. There is an asterisk because Juno was nominated for comedy, and it even lost to Sweeney Todd, which was up for Best Musical Comedy. It lost that. So Atonement was the big winner for the Golden Globes. Then we go to the PGA, Producers Guild. No Country for Old Men wins, and Atonement doesn't even get nominated. But then the BAFTA happens, and Atonement doesn't just pick up a record 14 nominations, it wins, and Juno and Michael Clayton are snubbed completely. So, Critics' Choice, everyone's like, okay, No Country for Old Men's the front runner. Golden Globes happen, they go, oh, Atonement might be the front runner. PGA happens, they say, oh, Atonement got snubbed, No Country won, No Country's the front runner. But then the BAFTAs came, and everyone was like, whoa, Atonement might be the front runner because it was the soonest award ceremony right before the Oscars, the BAFTA. And usually, if voters are voting for Atonement right before the Oscars, it usually carries in momentum. That's how we saw Anthony Hopkins. He won the BAFTA for The Father. He ended up winning the Oscar because of that momentum that we see with the BAFTA. So this was a very tight race, believe it or not, between No Country for Old Men and Atonement, which a lot of people don't really realize looking back at the years. But, they each had 2 awards apiece. And I think that snub for PGA is really what set No Country for Old Men a smidge above Atonement, if I had to predict it. But it was a much tighter race than a lot of people expected. So, and it's also crazy. There Will Be Blood was nominated for all 4 ceremonies, but didn't win Best Picture in any of them. But it's very interesting to look at it, isn't it, Chad? Because usually you'd be like, oh, yeah, No Country for Old Men was definitely the favorite. But really, Atonement did have some momentum going into Oscar night. So that was just a little bit of an insight into what the favorites were going into Oscar night. But there were some movies that didn't even make the cut. So it's time now to give an homage to our honorable mentions, the ones that didn't make it. And as someone who was 9 years old, I was finally getting into some of the bigger movies that were not just kids things, but like stuff that was actually kind of on the radar to get nominated. So there was a big year for musicals. Sweeney Todd, like I said, won the Golden Globe, didn't go on to get the Oscar nomination, but you also had Across the Universe, a Beatles musical that I really like, Enchanted, which really gave us the first big performance from Amy Adams that caught a lot of people's attention, and then you had Hairspray, which was a very good musical adaptation. A lot of great genre films too, like 3:10 to Yuma is a Western I actually really, really like. Hot Fuzz, a really fun British buddy comedy, obviously by Edgar Wright. Great animation. Ratatouille is one of my favorite Pixar movies. Simpsons movie, another great movie. And then High School Musical 2. It's my guilty pleasure favorite Disney Channel original movie. And then something completely different from that, Death Proof, Quentin Tarantino, which is a very underseen and underappreciated Quentin Tarantino movie as well. So those are the movies that I would have also kind of thrown into the consideration for Oscar buzz. Obviously, there are some blockbusters also that I really like. Spider-Man 3, Pirates of the Caribbean 3, movies I have a lot of fun with. Probably not Best Picture worthy, but very fun movies. Yeah. So Chad, did you have any other honorable mentions aside from the ones I mentioned?
Man, a lot of those are on my list. Some of them aren't, but it's just kind of like, with our ages, a little bit like High School Musical 2. I still haven't seen, but I plan to binge those soon. But yeah, I have a pretty big list as well. I just wrote down anything that caught my eye, and I was like, oh, I like that movie. So I got Freedom Writers, Murder Party, which is a really fun horror movie. Reno 911 Miami, very funny movie. 300. Blades of Glory. I love Will Ferrell movies. I did put Grindhouse on there, so that's just like kind of like the collection of those 2 with all the commercials and stuff.
Death Proof and Planet Terror. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Which I did see in the theater.
Nice.
Spider-Man 3, which I agree is very underrated. You and I just both love Sam Raimi and his Spider-Man trilogy. 28 Weeks Later, great horror sequel. Knocked Up. Live Free or Die Hard. A lot of people don't like that one because it's like PG-13 and stuff, but I think it's amazing. Okay. Ratatouille, Sicko, which is a Michael Moore film. Transformers. The first one was okay. Sunshine.
Definitely not the worst one of the Transformers.
Agreed.
Franchise.
The Simpsons movie, The Bourne Ultimatum. That's a great action trilogy.
It won a lot of Oscars for editing and sound awards. Yeah.
Hot Rod, which is one of my favorite comedies. Mr. Bean's Holiday. That's a fun Rowan Atkinson Bean outing. Across the Universe. That actually was one of the ones I saw in the theater with my current wife. And it's one thing that really got me into the Beatles. The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford. One of the longest titles I've ever heard. Before the Devil Knows You're Dead. I believe that's a Sidney Lumet film. Saw 4. The Mist. I Am Legend. Sweeney Todd, The Demon Barber of Fleet Street. Walk Hard, The Dewey Cox Story. Very funny movie.
Is it? I haven't seen it.
Okay. And then this was produced by Guillermo del Toro, not directed, but it's amazing horror movie. Also kind of a drama. The Orphanage, aka
Oh.
El Orfanato.
Hmm.
And then I have some that I put as my best picture worthy. Zodiac, David Fincher. Hot
I
Fuzz.
still haven't seen that. That's why it wasn't on my list, but it's like top of the list to watch. Yeah.
Zodiac, I love that movie. Hot Fuzz, Once, with the guy who did Sing Street, did Once.
Yeah.
Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, I adore that one. Hairspray, oh, that's such a fun movie. I love both the Hairsprays. The Darjeeling Limited, great Wes Anderson movie. Lars and the Real Girl, because I'm a big Ryan Gosling fan.
Yeah.
And then Gone Baby Gone. It's a Affleck directed movie.
All right, so let's atone for your sins for saying you've never seen High School Musical, and let's move on to our first movie of these 5, and that is Atonement. Chad, give us the lowdown on Atonement.
Oh, yes, Atonement. 2007, directed by Joe Wright, written by Christopher Hampton, cinematography by, I guess, Seamus McGarvey, music by Dario Marianelli, starring James McAvoy, Keira Knightley, Saoirse Ronan, Romola Garai, Vanessa Redgrave, Brenda Blethyn, Juno Temple, Benedict Cumberbatch, Patrick Kennedy, Harriet Walter, Peter Wright, Daniel Mays, Nonso Anozie, Gina McKee, Jeremy Renier, not Jeremy Renner, Michelle Duncan, Alfie Allen. And this one was based on the book Atonement by Ian McEwan. And it's also kind of about the writing of a book called Atonement.
Right.
2 people fall in love, but then a sexual assault occurs, and someone goes to jail, and then the military, and the lovers never get to really have their time together. It's just essentially in a nutshell.
Yeah, and according to your synopsis, and it is very much a very tragic story.
Yes.
It's a bummer. It really is. And it really is fascinating to me how certain events are portrayed and explained to the audience, and then later on you find out some of the stuff that you've seen before isn't even true. And it's really the use of unreliable narrator, using Saoirse Ronan's character, who would later grow up to be other actresses, Vanessa Redgrave at the very end, but seeing how her character, I believe her name's Bryony, seeing how she looks at a scenario and how she's able to formulate her opinions that aren't truth, but also understanding that at that age, maybe she did convince herself to believe that these things were or weren't happening. You got to account for the fact that she's a child. And I think that's what's so layered and complex about this movie, is that you get so many different points of view in this movie. And until the end, you really don't get the full vision of what actually happened until the very end. And you realize that she kind of convinced herself, out of jealousy, really, that James McAvoy's character was the villain and he should be blamed for this thing, when she knew all along it wasn't, and she was just holding a grudge. It's a very multi-dimensional character, and there's really no right or wrong in terms of who you root for, except for Benedict Cumberbatch, who is just slime and villain all over
for sure.
But what did you think of this movie, Chad?
Which is amazing, though, because Benedict Cumberbatch is, a lot of the times he does play kind of likable characters. I mean, I guess not. He has good range. He can go both ways. But yeah, this one for sure, he's easily the worst character. So slimy. Agreed. We kind of had a little bit of a different perspective on Saoirse Ronan's character, where it's like, why did she freak out so much, when she saw them together? And it's like, Carrie was like, oh, well, she's a repressed little girl in olden times. That's not, becoming of them. And, to be caught having this affair before marriage and, all this stuff. And so it's just kind of like where I almost could see how that being that young and not knowing about Benedict Cumberbatch's character as this guy, because she wasn't, she might have been there, but she didn't really maybe pick up on his kind of facial expressions when he's looking at Juno Temple's character, so I feel like she kind of did believe it or force herself to believe it, like you said, out of jealousy, out of fear, being uncomfortable.
It's very clear early on with her writing and stuff. She's a very smart kid.
Yeah,
I think that's true. Important because they paint her as such a smart kid that when she makes these mistakes, you're kind of like, I think she kind of knew, but I think it's really her almost pathologically convincing herself, I'm going to go after him, even though she kind of knows, she doesn't have a shot with him because he's so much older, but it's like that crush that's kind of consuming her. And that's what makes it so complex and so hard to, it's such a dynamic character because of it.
Yeah.
Because you have this element of, she's very smart. She's
Yeah.
probably more smart than she lets on, but then also she's doing these things that are obviously lies, and she's destroying people's lives because of it.
Yeah, I definitely can see that. That's a great point, Dale. That actually kind of like recontextualizes the movie a little bit for me, and I totally see where you're coming from for sure. So this whole secret kind of thing happens where everybody now believes her, and I kind of want to note another movie. There's this movie in 2012. I forget the director. He directed Another Round. He also directed another movie in 2012 called The Hunt. It's kind of a very similar thing starring Mads Mikkelsen, where like a little girl basically, kind of accuses him of sexual stuff, and like everyone just believes her because she's a little girl. You want to believe someone who says something. You're like, why would she say something like that unless something really happened? And you're not going to believe someone who has this like agency to lie. So yeah, it really is heartbreaking because you do really believe this love between James McAvoy and Keira Knightley.
They get back together, but the problem is at the end you find out that they never really did, and that's what's so heartbreaking.
Yes.
It's like you see them eventually overcome the obstacle and end up together and be able to live together, and then at the end you realize that's what she imagined in her head to make her feel better about herself after she realized her lie. And that's the heartbreaker. It's not the fact that he had to go to war and all this stuff, which is heartbreaking, but they did end up back together. But then it's like, no, that's what I wish could have been. And it's almost like at the end of Parasite when you see him buy this house and he gets his dad, finally his dad is free, but then at the end he says, hopefully someday I'll be able to make that happen. You realize that there's a vision of the future, and that what we want, our expectations and reality are two completely different things. And that's what's so, my stomach drops at the end when she says that, like, and that's how I wish it could have ended. But he died in war and she died getting drowned in a tunnel that filled with water. And it's crushing. It crushed my soul. And I watched it. I was like, damn, like, ugh,
yeah, it is actually a really brilliant device to, I don't want to call it like manipulative or anything, because I think it's just so well done that like when you see it, you see, oh, it makes sense. They get together. He's mad, which a great performance from James McAvoy and the actress who plays older Bryony. And, they just like that one scene is just so great where she's so like apologetic, but it's like some things you just can't make up for. Like if you ruin people's lives here at the end, like you said, when you find out that like, she's writing this book, and the book is kind of a way for her to make these amends because it doesn't have a happy ending. And so she's like, I'm about to die. I need to kind of make peace with this and atone as much as possible, and in a way, me writing this book about them getting back together is them getting back together when really it's not, and it never happens and it never will. And that's just so tragic.
I think the unfortunate thing about this movie is that a lot of people, when they see the poster and they see who directed it, because it's Joe Wright, they assume, oh, it's going to be your traditional period piece because he just came off of Pride and Prejudice. But it's really not. It's like, if you set this in the modern era and don't make them like have these beautiful costumes and this lush like English London background or whatever, I think it would have the same impact. I think it's just because it's set in that time and it's got costumes, people just pass it as just like this random period drama, but it's really not. It's not your Pride and Prejudice where it's like, oh, we're just in British accents and things happen and there are love triangles. Like, no, this is like some deep shit. Like this is really, really deep. And I wish Joe Wright would return to this kind of filmmaking, because he made that terrible Peter Pan remake. He made Darkest Hour, which I thought was good, but it was very like Oscar baity.
Just a vehicle for an Oscar win. Yeah.
Right. Woman in the Window was basically just Rear Window with Amy Adams, except it wasn't great. Like he hasn't made a movie like this since this. And I think I would really like to see him return to something like this, because I think he did transcend what just everyone assumed for a period drama.
I will return. I will find you.
I just wanted to point, before we move on, I just wanted to point out another thing. It's just like, for me, it felt kind of like you're saying, like it's this big kind of period piece, but it almost feels like it wants to be this epic story, but it's like very short for like an epic movie. So I'm like, maybe if they could have like lengthened a lot of stuff, or I don't know if there's any deleted scenes or anything like that, but it felt almost kind of too short. So I'm like, maybe if they could have like added some more stuff. But
because that whole
yeah,
first hour is like all that one thing of her, seeing them, having sex, and then like she sees Benedict Cumberbatch. That all happens in the first hour, and then like the
right.
war, and then all the other stuff, like kind of that whole second hour is then a whole like 50, 60 years of stuff. So I get what you're saying. Like the second half didn't take as much time as the first half, because the first half really, like, they really marinate with that. And I also have to say, Saoirse Ronan, this is her first big role, and she is like 12. I think she's 12 when she made this movie. Like, she is exceptional for her age. And the one complaint I had is that as she got older, I just was like, I wish this was just Saoirse Ronan. I wish they would refilm the scenes with older Brian with Saoirse Ronan nowadays, and then kind of stick her into the movie, just because I think she was just so charismatic and so like interesting to watch as an actress that I wish I could have just seen more of her.
That would be interesting, but I also do think that like I do think they did since we'll never get that. I do think the transference from Saoirse to the older actress was pretty good. Maybe not really like Moonlight quality, but still pretty good.
Yeah. Also, I also want to bring up the tracking shot on the beach, because now we see like 1917 does this thing where it's like a long continuous take, and Birdman. But before that, long takes like this were not as common. And this long take of the beach is just, in all 5 movies, it's probably the one sequence that I have just like was the most blown away with, because of just how the camera danced around the beach. And Dunkirk is a movie that kind of dealt with a similar thing of like all these soldiers on a beach and different stories, but in one shot. I think this resonated more emotionally with me than the entirety of Dunkirk did. And I don't know if that's
interesting,
because the score is also so good, because you have just a beautiful score, original score. It actually starts with like the typewriter keys kind of incorporated into the score of the music,
which is cool. Yeah,
just the combination of the cinematography with the score, and then with James McAvoy just walking around this beach and the choir singing, like that moment is just so good too. And I do think
that's pretty great. But the only thing about it that I really took me out of it and made me hate it was them like killing the horses. That really like bugged me a big time, and I'm just like, I don't want to watch this right now. But other than that, it's very well done. I just wish they wouldn't have done that.
Again, it's a very sad story, and a lot of these movies are kind of bummers or end on very like melancholy notes. Only one of these is a feel-good movie, but I think Atonement is just so interesting, and I think it's because Joe Wright has done so many things I don't love, that seeing something that I saw of his that I really did love made it all the more enjoyable for me.
Agreed,
but yeah, Atonement nominated for 7 Oscars. It was one of the front runners going in, either this or No Country for Old Men. It won the BAFTA, won the Golden Globe for Best Drama, nominated for Best Picture, Supporting Actress for Saoirse Ronan, of course, Best Adapted Screenplay, Best Art Direction, which we now know as Production Design, Best Cinematography, of course, that sweeping tracking shot on the beach, and then Best Costume Design. And it wins one award, and that is Best Original Score. Like I said, with the amazing keys, typing, and the sounds of that incorporated.
Super good, yeah.
It is really good. So Atonement, as we said, is based on this woman writing a novel. It's about a writer. So let's turn the page, shall we, of the book to a movie starring Elliot Page that was nominated and won Best Original Screenplay on the page, Juno. What's up with my segues, Chad? You don't like my segues?
I love your segues.
Anyway, we're talking about Juno, directed by Jason Reitman. Chad, tell us about Juno.
Oh, yes. Juno, directed by Jason Reitman, like you said, written by Diablo Cody, cinematography by Eric Steelberg, music by Matteo Messina, starring Elliot Page, Michael Cera, Jennifer Garner, Jason Bateman, Allison Janney, J.K. Simmons, Olivia Thirlby. Pretty simple plot. Girl loves a guy. You know how these things work. They have sex. They have a baby. She's in high school. She doesn't want the baby. She thinks maybe she'll go have an abortion. Decides against that, and then ends up wanting to give the baby up for adoption. It's a coming-of-age film.
And I will preface, before we get into the discussion of it, obviously, Elliot Page, one of our best actors, he obviously went through a transition, so we will be referring to him as Elliot, and we will refer to the pronouns he, him, his. But when referring to the character of Juno, Juno is a woman, so we will refer to Juno as a she and Elliot as a he, just to keep everything in line and respectful to what Elliot's to who Elliot is. So Chad, what do you think of Juno? Because as I said, this is really the only feel-good movie of the 5. And even then, there are some deeper, darker things. Oh, you're eating your orange Tic Tacs. That's great.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, these are my only vice. I'm sorry about that. So,
pulling that quote out of nowhere. Yeah, I love it. But yeah, what were your thoughts on Juno? This feel-good coming of age.
All right. Well.
Oh yeah. No, you can finish. I can give my thoughts if you want
to
eat your Tic Tacs.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I enjoy Juno a lot. I think it's one of those, like, of these 5 movies, it's the one that I obviously enjoy watching the most because it is a feel-good coming-of-age story. Now, does it reach the emotional and, like, deep depths of these other movies? Probably not. But not every Oscar film has to. You know, when we get to 2017, my favorite movie of that group is an A24 indie film, like, about this girl coming of age. So, like, it's interesting to see how, you know, the Oscars can embrace so many different genres of filmmaking, because I think Juno is a very special film within its own genre. And I know a lot of people say, you know, this is a very anti-choice, more pro-life statement film, but I don't think it is. And Diablo Cody herself has said it is not. And I think it's important to note that, like, she does have the choice in this movie. And just because you're pro-choice doesn't mean you're going to have an abortion. You could still go through with having a baby. It just means that it's your choice. And I think this is very clearly a film that says this was Juno's choice to have the baby, opposed to aborting it. It's not to say that abortion's wrong or bad. And even the person protesting the abortion looks ridiculous doing it. Like, babies want to be born, like that stuff. It's meant to be so silly and goofy because it really makes no sense. The whole pro-life argument. Obviously, people have spun this film into this is pro-life because she doesn't want to have an abortion. But, like, I think it is very clear that this is Juno's choice, and I think Diablo Cody has stood by her views that this is a pro-choice film, even if she does not choose the choice of abortion. So I do want to get that out of the air, because I do think this film is not that. It's not what people have spun this film to be. I don't think it is a negative or very pessimistic film at all. I think it's a very optimistic film, because there are people who do want to go through with the choice of keeping a baby and what it means to so many different people, because it affects her, it affects her parents, it affects her boyfriend who, you know, impregnated her, it affects the people she's going to give the baby to or wants to give the baby to. And even their characters are so complex, because one is so ready to be a mother and one we find out is not. I think it's very interesting to see how every single perspective of this single event is seen through. And I think that's really the power of the movie, is seeing every single point of view and every single reaction from so many different parties involving this one subject matter.
Little pink plus sign is so unholy.
That ain't no Etch-a-Sketch. This is one doodle that can't be undid, Holmes Gillett.
I saw this in the theater. I did not see the Atonement. The Atonement was my first watch for this. But Juno I saw in the theater, and then you know, I didn't like love it then or anything like that. This watch, I really liked this movie quite a bit. It impacted me a lot more. I really liked this couple a lot. I think they had a lot of the you know, carried a lot of the emotional weight, because the kids aren't going to have as much emotion about this, because they just, you know, kids in high school, they just don't have like they haven't developed enough to really ponder a lot of this. I think a lot of the time
mentally developed.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, and even like Michael Cera, Polly Bleeker in the movie, you know, he's just like, should I come with you? What do I do? You know, he's just so confused, and it's like, I'm just gonna go run, or, you know, something like that. And he's just like, he doesn't really know how to handle the situation, but he's like kind of opening to being there for her. And then, you know, they have a lot of like ups and downs with their relationship, and, you know, they end up, you know, actually, you know, they give the baby away, and then they end up still being in love. And I just love that, like, end scene with them, you know, playing the
Singing
music, and
together,
it's such a beautiful song.
Like I mentioned earlier, the soundtrack's great. I mean, I love the use of music. It fits the quirky tone, because this is a very quirky movie. I mean, it deals with, you know, deeper things, but it's so lighthearted. It's very quirky. And actually, that's one of my complaints, is just that early on, it's a lot of like having to settle into what the tone is, because the characters, the way they speak, are like, you know, it's interesting writing for high schoolers and hearing how high schoolers speak. It's at first you kind of have to be like, wait, what did they say? Like the way they talk.
I mean, I'm already pregnant, so what other kind of shenanigans can I get into?
Once you settle into it, I think it's really charming and mesmerizing. Like once they do meet the couple that wants to adopt the baby, like that's when it really starts to really amp up to me. And that's when I was really like on board with what it was doing, because it's balancing the comedy and drama really well. Whereas at first I was like, wait, what's going on? And then, you know, it starts to get its groove. I think Diablo Cody's script is great. I think she really does write very honestly for these characters. I think, you know, she is such an interesting story, because she was like a stripper and then she becomes a screenwriter, ends up making this script and has this sensational, response to it. And then goes on to make other great movies that have, developed cult classics like Jennifer's Body and stuff like that. And then partnering with Jason Reitman, I think the two of them work really well together because she just like has such an interesting and unique way of writing, and he just has a very simple outlook on how his direction, like it's not super stylized, but it's it's comforting, it's warm, it feels familiar, in a good way. It's not like familiar in your like Oscar baity, like boring, predictable sense. It's like just familiar in the sense that like it looks like you almost feel like you're catching up with old friends, and that's what I think is so special about their partnership as director and screenwriter.
Absolutely. Yeah, I really love the screenplay. I'm so glad this one won the award because I just think that like it has such a great indie feel to it. It doesn't feel like Oscar baity at all, even though it does have a lot of these performances that elevate it to Oscar. And I think that has a lot to do with the writing, a lot to do with the acting. I love
the performances too. They weren't seasoned actors yet. I mean, the only one who was really kind of mainstream at the point, I'd say, was Jennifer Garner and maybe Allison Janney. But
Jason
like J.K.
Bateman.
Simmons, Jason Bateman was, for Arrested Development, but in terms of film, he wasn't really a huge film star yet. And then Michael Cera, same thing. Arrested Development wasn't a huge film star. This was pre-Scott Pilgrim. And then even J.K. Simmons, like he had been in things, but he was never really like an actual like awards player. And then he would go on to play one of the most iconic awards-winning roles in Whiplash. Like
the best thing you can do is find a person who loves you for exactly what you are.
It's really interesting to see. And then of course Elliot Page, he is sensational in this role. And this was kind of the movie that's put him on the map. And I just love seeing these actors kind of at the beginning of their career or the beginning of their film career before they would go on to be, super mega stars, and seeing how they acted, similar to what we said with Atonement with Saoirse Ronan and James McAvoy, people who weren't 100% household names yet. And now a lot of these names are definitely household names. J.K. Simmons and Allison Janney would go on to win Oscars years after this. And I think that's what's brilliant about the cast here.
For sure, yeah, and I just love a lot of the lines. I'm sure you'll show some clips, but like the opening line of like it started with the chair. A lot of the dialogue is great. I think there's a lot of great characters, a lot of great character moments and dialogue in this movie. Like I really love the relationship between Juno and Jason Bateman's character because they get into horror movies and music, and that's how I wore the shirt. It's like 93 is the best year for rock and roll. And it's like, no man, it's 77. And it's just a lot of these just sound like real conversations and just disagreements, and bringing people into liking things that they never even thought about before. And it's just you really start to like these characters, and that's why it's like kind of like heartbreaking when you kind of see that like Jason Bateman's character, you really start to like him, I feel like, because of their relationship. And then when he starts to go, I'm thinking about leaving my wife, it's heartbreaking because you really feel for her. Jennifer Garner's performance is that basically, this is one of the biggest emotional things that hit me. It's the only time that I actually teared up. I didn't tear up during Atonement really, but during this, when it goes, oh my God, I'm going to start tearing up now thinking about it. Her going and looking at the baby, and Juno and Polly Bleeker, they didn't even really want to go see the baby because it's just not there. And when just the line where it's like, it was always hers, or however that line is, I'm getting goosebumps right now from that. And just like seeing her, Juno just watching her, in the mall playing with these kids, and just, that she's like, she says it from the beginning, like, I feel like I was destined to be a mother. And it's just, seeing that dynamic for her, like just being 100% sure. And, Jason Bateman, not so much. And it's heartbreaking, but then you just go, I know it's going to end up okay, because Juno and Polly Bleeker fall in love. They get to sing together. They get to go on to do whatever they're going to do after high school. And then, she's going to raise that baby so well. And, I don't know, Jason Bateman will go maybe be in a band,
live out the days he's still been living in. And I think that's what's so interesting about Jason Bateman and Jennifer Garner's characters, because earlier on, it's almost like she's way more connected with Jason Bateman than Jennifer Garner's character. Like Jennifer Garner almost feels like she's intruding on them whenever they're together because, Jason Bateman, though, has the mind of like a high schooler. He's still living in his glory days of like his youth. And that's why they get along so well, is because Jennifer Garner's way here with maturity and Jason Bateman's way here. And that's not a criticism of Jason Bateman. It's just he's not ready to be a father. And I think that's also what's intriguing, and what makes me feel for him a little bit also is because, some people just aren't ready. And I think it's important that this movie says, some people just aren't ready. The actual nature of not being able, getting cold feet, it's understandable because a lot of people get cold feet. And at this point, it's way too late because the baby's about to be born in like a few weeks. So like, I almost empathize with him because I'm like, yeah, if I was in his position, I don't know if I'd be ready like right now in my life as a 23-year-old, obviously, but like I don't know about his scenario. But a lot of the times we're not ready and we think we are, and I do empathize with that. And then Jennifer Garner, to see how like at the end, like it is Juno realizes it's like, no, like this is the right woman to do it. Like I do have a lot of respect for her because she's willing to follow through with this.
Absolutely. And just like the performances, I know I've talked a lot about them, but I just wanted to note a couple of little things. There's with Jason Bateman, when, she comes over unannounced and she gets like, scolded for this, but Juno comes over unannounced and she's like showing them the baby picture. You can see, him, he's just like, oh yeah, look at that. But not like, oh my God, look at that. You can tell it's just different. And with her and when Jennifer Garner comes in, she's surprised that she's even there, but then she's like, look, you can tell the difference between.
Juno nominated for only 4 nominations. Obviously, this is a very small indie, and it's not like this deep dramatic thing. It's a comedy, so it makes sense it was not nominated for a ton. It's also not very stylistic. It's not going to get nominated for cinematography, all that stuff. But it is nominated for Best Picture, Best Director, at the time, Best Actress, Elliot Page, and then Best Original Screenplay is where it wins for Diablo Cody. So it's really nice that all these movies get a win in some respect. And Diablo Cody, I think, was a very worthy winner for that.
And on to the next movie, Dill, right? I Am Shiva, God of Death. We're talking about Michael Clayton.
That's right. Michael Clayton. Chad, tell us about Michael Clayton.
Michael Clayton, directed by Tony Gilroy, written by Tony Gilroy, cinematography by Robert Elswit, music by James Newton Howard, starring George Clooney, Tom Wilkinson, Tilda Swinton, Sidney Pollack, Michael O'Keefe, Sean Cullen, Ken Howard, Merritt Weaver, Austin Williams, Dennis O'Hare, Bill Raymond, Robert Prescott, and Terry Serpico. This movie's about, it's kind of reminiscent to me a little bit of like an Aaron Brockovich in A Dark Waters, but in the middle. Where
I haven't seen either of those, so now I have a good intuition of what those are
you
about.
you have like an organization that comes out, and not everybody knows, but some people know that, hey, they're actually harming people. The products that they make are causing cancer. The lawyer for this company actually has like a mental breakdown and, starts to take his clothes off in a room during a deposition or, whatever's occurring there. And, so this law firm that George Clooney works for as well, they have like this issue because they support, this bad company is the client, and he's the fixer, George Clooney, so he has to go and help fix the situation. And so that's in a nutshell. I don't know, it was kind of long, so I guess not in a nutshell, but that's pretty much what the movie's about.
I like this movie. I think stylistically and like aesthetically, I'm a little more engaged in it than I am story-wise, only because it is very convoluted. There's a lot of plot. It's a very like screenplay forward movie. It's very much like what's on the page, all these different layers, all these things intersecting. And it was a little, this might just be a criticism of myself, it was a little hard to follow at times where I was like trying to piece it all together, but like it was a little bit more intelligent than a lot of these movies in terms of like just like big words and big things and concepts and stuff. What's so cool about Tony Gilroy's filmmaking is that it feels like you lit a fuse and it just kind of keeps going. Like it never really settles down. It just keeps plowing forward. And I really appreciate that. I think the editing is really good. The pacing is really good. Just one of those movies that I think I might need to watch again to fully grasp, only because there is so much going on and it's not particularly my cup of tea. I hate that phrase just because it's so overused, but this movie is just like not my cup of tea, but I know it is definitely, there's so many people that are going to love this and eat this up because it very much is their cup of tea. Like my dad would love this movie. I just know based on the styles and types of movies he likes. And the performances are great. I mean, Tom Wilkinson, I love him. Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. Like he's great in this. He's the standout for me. But obviously Tilda Swinton, this is her Oscar-winning role, which is shocking that she's only won one because she's one of our best actresses. But like, she's great. And George Clooney's great as a lead guy too. I mean, I just think they are just very, very great performances. Great script. It's just like not fully something that I'm necessarily the right audience for. If that makes sense.
Michael Clayton, I gotta say, I saw this. I'll start with saying I saw this not in the theater. But this wasn't the type of movies I was seeing in the theater. But I did work at Blockbuster for a bit after the movie theater that I worked at. And I did check it out from Blockbuster. I watched it. I didn't love it. But I think also because of my taste and, maybe just like being younger, I didn't really, and that's not a knock on you or anything. You're very smart guy. I don't know if I was as smart back then, but my tastes weren't that great. But coming up now, I've seen this movie in the past, I think, year and a half twice, once for this. And since that time before, and especially this time as now, I adore this movie. I really love this movie. It's not to say that your critiques aren't valid, but I really just really dig this movie. It's such a great, I don't want to say fast paced, but it's like, yeah, it is a lot, but like, I feel like this story and just like, you're like, what's going to happen? It's kind of an edge of your seat film a lot of the times, not because it's fast paced, because you're like wondering like what's going to happen with this. Cause this company's not going to want them digging around too much. And then, it's like moments when you find, out that, Tom Wilkinson's character Arthur has the document, and then you're like, oh shit. Okay. What's going to happen with this when they find that out and stuff. And they do. And it just like, it gets really big into like these, like you said, there's like a jump scare moment. You said to me privately, like, it's a jump scare moment. I got you. And it got me too, I'm sure the first time, but every time I kind of braced myself, like, when is this going to happen? And it's just such a quiet moment, and then boom, and it's a car explosion because, and then it kind of goes back in time and stuff like that. And you're like, oh, why is this car exploding? And, I love seeing, I know I'm jumping around a bit, but I love seeing like George Clooney. You get to see him go in and show how he is as like a fixer. And I just love this dialogue. You have like this one guy who I guess he killed somebody or seriously injured somebody, running him over. And as you see, he's this rich kind of asshole running over a guy. And then he's all defensive, like, why was he running out in the middle of the street? Maybe if this, maybe if that. You see the wife's like, this isn't gonna, and then George Clooney's like, he's like, I'm not a, I don't remember the line, but he's like, I'm not a miracle worker, but I'm a janitor. I clean stuff up. And, so he goes and I just love the performance from George Clooney, and he fits in that role. But you see, he's so layered because like he's kind of really good at being what he is, but almost to his detriment, because like he goes and like the law firm's like, we need you to be this. But he's like in financial ruin because he made some bad choices. His brother is kind of a shitty guy who kind of didn't help him out with his finances. So he's like, I've been doing this for like 20 years and look at where I'm at. And, I just need to do something. And, so you can see why he might go a different way than he actually does, because he is, setting everything up for you to believe that he might actually take this buyout and go against what Arthur wanted to do, because Arthur's actually killed in this movie because of and it's such a crazy scene too, like how they do it, and it's disgusting. And so you get to see like all this stuff that this company's going to do, and you start to really hate this company. And I just loved how everything plays out. I love the moment between him and his son when, he's basically, because his son's like, read my book. And you understand later why this book actually becomes mega, mega important to the story, which, usually it might be a throwaway thing, like just a relationship thing between him and his kid. And then you have the moment between him and his son, like explaining, hey, you're not going to end up like your uncle. I know you kind of look up to him, but like, he's one of these guys and you'll never be that. You're going to go somewhere. You're never going to be like me or him. And I just love that he's like that for his kid, because, a lot of parents might not be that way. This has one of my favorite endings of all time in movies. I love how everything builds up to this. You're trying to figure out what decision George Clooney's going to make. And even if he can get this company, if he wanted to make that choice. And just like when she comes out of this meeting, Tilda Swinton's character comes out of this meeting, and you just see the camera shows the doorway and he's there, and you're like, oh shit, what's going down here? What did he do? It's just so amazing, and then you have the callback, like I mentioned with my segue, where Shiva. Earlier you have Arthur go, I am Shiva, the god of death, and stuff like that, because he's so guilt ridden of like what he's been doing, defending these people. Even that's part of his job, but he's a lawyer that actually cares, that just goes, not saying lawyers don't care, because some of them do, but he's one that's so guilt ridden that he is going to stop at nothing to actually take this company down. And that's why he's killed. But then later you get the call back with George Clooney where it's like, I am Shiva, the god of death.
I'm Shiva, the god of death.
I just love that scene so much. And then, you get him walking away while all the cops come in, and then you just have her defeated, just getting on her knees. And then like he goes in the car, and you just have like a long take of just him in the car while the credits roll.
And it's also still
so
always
amazing.
focused on him too. And I love how it kind of zooms out and you see everything going on behind him as he's walking away from it. Almost like when in an action movie you kind of walk away and the explosion happens behind you. It's the same thing. It really is. You basically set the fire and walked away. And there's seven nominations. It wins for one, and it is Tilda Swinton. I think this last scene is really kind of what got her that Oscar, because I think she's done bigger and better roles than this, but like this scene is like one of her best works. This one scene, and it's great. But it was nominated for Best Picture, Director, actor for George Clooney, supporting actor for Tom Wilkinson, screenplay, score, and then it wins for supporting actress for Tilda Swinton. She's the only one who wins for it. But like I just said, the explosion while you walk away, it's a fitting segue because the next movie we're going to talk about has the same shot of the villain walking away from the exploding fiery car behind him. That's right, we're talking about No Country for Old Men. As soon as I started talking about that scene, I was like, wait, this is a great segue, and I just wanted to get to it. But Chad, tell us about No Country for Old Men.
Yeah, No Country for Old Men, directed by Joel and Ethan Coen, some of the greats. Written by Joel and Ethan Coen. Cinematography by Roger Deakins. Yes.
The king, the goat.
Yes, queen. Music by Carter Burwell, a Twilight composer. Starring Tommy Lee Jones, Javier Bardem, Josh Brolin, Woody Harrelson, Kelly MacDonald, Garrett Dillahunt, Tess Harper, Barry Corbin, Stephen Root, Roger Boyce, Beth Grant, Anna Reeder, Josh Blaylock, Gene Jones. I will tell the synopsis now, but then I have a little bit of a story. Actually, let me tell the little bit of the story first. I worked at the movie theater, like I've mentioned, during this time. When this movie came out, I did not see it in the theater. I just wasn't like a huge film fan. It's just not the type of movie that I generally would go and see during that time. I was more so seeing like Sweeney Todd, not saying that's not a great movie, but that was stuff that I would rather see, like a Tim Burton movie and stuff. Yeah, exactly.
When I talked earlier about this was the least watched Oscar show since the 1973-74 Oscars, it's because these were 5 indie movies. These were not blockbusters by any means. So
right.
I do think that has to play a part in like why this was a little bit less received, is because these 5 movies were artsy fartsy films. But yeah, true. On.
Yeah, so basically, I did a lot of jobs at this theater, but one of the things I did was I would rip people's tickets. They would get the ticket, I would rip it, tell them where the theater is, stuff like that. An older couple was coming through, and the older part is important to the story. They were going through, and they're going, "I'm going to see No Country for Old Men." I was like, "Oh, cool." And then the older guy was like, "I'm trying to find out why not."
That's great. That's a great line.
I remember that to this day because it was just such a good line. Yeah. So, anyways, No Country for Old Men is about. It's a very simple story. A guy goes and he stumbles upon like this like cartel shootout thing that happened. Yep. He finds a briefcase of money over in some shade by a tree that a guy crawled away from the scene. Finds it. Protects it, goes back to his wife, and then he's just the whole time he's trying to get away with this money, hide it, whatever he can do with it, because, and this is one of the best villains in like movie history, Anton Chigurh, played by Javier Bardem, is after him. And yeah, that's pretty much all the movie is about.
This was my first time watching this movie, which is crazy because I feel like this is a movie that everyone's like, you haven't seen this movie? But I really liked it. I really did enjoy it. I think the Coen brothers have a very distinct style, and this is very much not it. Like, this was a very different movie. Now we've seen them do movies like True Grit, like kind of following this style, but up till then it was kind of more of the indie kind of Big Lebowski, Fargo, like dark comedy route. But this is really their first like embrace of like drama and like Western, but it's not your traditional Western. And I think that's what's so appealing about this, is it's a different Western. You don't have the hero riding into the blazing glory of sunsets and all that stuff like you do in most Westerns. It ends with a very melancholy note. And at first when I watched it, I was like, that's it? That's how it ends, but that's the point. And it's like one of those things where like I have a film buff in my ear going, that's the point, Dylan. And I was like, yeah, it is the point. Because it really is a bummer, kind of like Atonement. It's like it ends with like you're just like, oh, Shit. Okay. But the whole film, I just love how stylistic it is. The way they play with silence is so brilliant. Like the moments where Anton Chigurh is on screen are terrifying, but I think it's even scarier when he's not on screen. When you have that impending doom and you don't know if he's behind the door or not. Where you see the shadow behind the door and you're like, is that him? Is it not him? It's almost like the best horror movies of all time. It feels like a horror film set in a Western template. It really does, because he has that amazing weapon as well, like that thing that just shoots the bolt out of the door and stuff that you use to kill animals. Like it's terrifying, and he is just such a great character. I think that is one of the most surefire Oscar wins of all time. Like as soon as everyone saw that, they probably could have made him the only nominee that year, because it's like Heath Ledger and the Joker. It's like roles that just there's nothing to match it that year. And I'm glad The Dark Knight didn't come out a year earlier. Otherwise, we would have gotten Heath Ledger versus Javier Bardem, and I don't know how you choose.
Right.
But this is one of the great villain performances, and I think that presence and the absence of the presence is what is so brilliant. The tension that just builds in you when you think he's on the other side of the door, or when he's not and you're just scared that he is, when you're in the vent and you're hoping he's not on the other end of it, like stuff like that. It's just so engaging and so terrifying, and it's very bleak but very, very effective. So Chad, I like this movie. What do you think? Do you like this movie?
Yeah, because I was going to say the exact same thing that you said. This does feel like a horror movie a lot of the times, just because of Anton Chigurh, how menacing and imposing he is. Because, like you said, he's so unpredictable. You know, there's nothing he will not do, and that's what's really scary about him. But almost he just makes these unpredictable decisions sometimes. You'll think he's just, he'll just kill anybody in his path. That's kind of boring. Now, sometimes he'll bust out the coin on you and go,
What's the most you ever lost in a coin toss?
And so he's kind of like a freaking Two-Face in a way, another Batman tie, where it flips the coin is going to kill you if
he's
it's
the perfect
heads
mix
or
of
whatever.
Joker and Two-Face. It's like if
there
you combine the two, you get Anton Chigurh or Sugar.
And when
or
you
Sugar, or
Sugar, is it Sugar? Did you just say Sugar? Yeah. So basically, that's one of the most two most terrifying, well, actually three. Now that I keep thinking about all these things,
right.
The three, maybe four most terrifying moments in the scene. You can cut to some shots later, but it's the one when he wants that car and he's like, stay still. Let me put this up to your head real quick. And he kills that one guy with that bolt. Oh my God.
Ooh,
that's like, what? Like, no, guy, don't let him do that. It's just like, it's just so instant. It's just scary as hell. And then you have later you have the moment with him and Woody Harrelson, and you can like analyze that scene to death. Before he kills Woody Harrelson's character, and then you have him with Josh Brolin's wife, and you're like, what's going to happen here? And there's just so much to it, and it's just like, he wants you to say a certain thing, like call it. Don't do it. And then the one epic, just like the one that you brought up, when Josh Brolin, he's waiting and he's just like waiting, and you kind of see that shadow under the door, and you're just waiting for something to come, like a shadow to come under the door, and it's just that suspense. It's like one of the best not horror movies that is kind of a horror movie ever. It's just so much suspenseful moments. And just like, kind of, I guess, enough about Anton Chigurh, but like, just having like all these like moments with Josh Brolin, it's like, it kind of also was reminiscent of like, Breaking Bad a lot for me, where, Josh Brolin, goes to this hotel and is very like kind of meticulous about like, and careful about what he does. He kind of like feels like a Gus Fring a little bit, like really careful, trying to not take any chances whatsoever. He's doing the thing where he's trying to hide this briefcase. And I just love when they show like all of the steps that happen in a thing.
The Javier Bardem stuff and Josh Brolin stuff is just so much more exciting to me, because it really just feels like the battle between them two. And then Tommy Lee Jones is kind of like this third party, and especially in the end, he gets a lot more to do. But I was more engrossed in the others. So when it's like more on Tommy Lee Jones, it's like, oh, this is interesting. This is where a lot of the commentary comes from, of like, the No Country for Old Men. But at the same time, I think the other characters are just a little bit more interesting, because it's one of the best villains of all time on cinema. So I think it's just hard. It's like in Batman, where it's like Batman is the least important part of the Dark Knight, because the other characters around him are just so exciting. And that's, I love that movie as well. And this is what that reminded me of. It's like the villain is so interesting that like, I just wish it could have all just been about him. And I love that moment, like you said, where he walks out of her house, because you don't know what ends up happening. You don't know if she does call heads or tails. You don't know if she calls it at all. And he walks out and he just checks his shoes, and that could be anything. Is he checking because he killed her and he's checking for blood?
Or
Is he just checking to shoot? Like, it really is interesting. Is he checking to make sure he just doesn't leave footprints? It's assumed he killed her,
It's
but you
just like-
don't know.
just like perfect editing and everything with that, like the video you
It's
showed me,
brilliant.
just like a lot of study you can do with this movie. And I do see where you're coming from, because honestly, I was just talking about this movie and I forgot all about Tommy Lee Jones. Not saying that he's not great in the movie, he
He's great.
is. And there's a lot of great scenes that are very important for the title of the movie and kind of the point of the movie. It's just like, there's this evil force out there, and but then you do have like some of these conversations, about where they talk about like, people with, different hair colors and stuff nowadays. And it's just not the same as it used to be, kind of a commentary. So,
and Roger Deakins, we brought him up earlier. I mean, I think it's beautifully shot as well. I mean,
yes.
it's crazy that he didn't win one until 2017 for Blade Runner, but at the same time, we see what it loses to, and I think this is one of the best cinematography races. You have Roger Deakins for this, you have Roger Deakins for Assassination of Jesse James, you have the cinematographer for There Will Be Blood, and you have the cinematographer for Atonement. It's a pick 'em. It's like which one is the best? And I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. 8 nominations for No Country for Old Men and 4 wins, so it got half of the awards it was nominated for. It cleaned up at the Oscars. It won, it was nominated for sound editing, sound mixing, cinematography, and editing, which it didn't win, but it won Best Picture, Best Director for the Coen Brothers, Best Supporting Actor, obviously, for Javier Bardem, and Best Adapted Screenplay. And those are 4 really great awards to win for acting, directing, writing, and picture. Like, that's it. That's the crowning achievement of the Oscars. So, obviously, Oscar voters loved it. I said earlier it was a two-way race between Atonement and No Country for Old Men, but obviously this one prevailed because it won 4 of the 8 No Country for Old Men. A lot of violence, a lot of blood in this movie. So let's talk about more blood. There Will Be Blood. Let's talk about it, Chad. Tell us about it.
Oh, right. Yes, There Will Be Blood. Directed by Paul Thomas Anderson. Written by Paul Thomas Anderson. Cinematography by Robert Elswit. Music by Johnny Greenwood. I did want to get into this, and I'll talk more about this later. But Johnny Greenwood, he's the lead guitarist for Radiohead. That's one of my favorite bands. You had there you go. And Rainbows came out, and he did a score for like a Best Picture nominee. Holy crap! What a great year for Radiohead, Johnny Greenwood, and he would go on to score like every other film of Paul Thomas Anderson after this, and I love it. There's a lot of Radiohead in the score, and I can get into that later. But starring Daniel Day-Lewis, Paul Dano, Kevin J. O'Connor, Syrian Hines, Dylan Frezier, Russell Harvard, Sidney McAllister, Colleen Foy, David Willis, Hans Howells, Paul F. Tompkins, Jim Downey, David Warshawski, Barry Del Sherman, and it was based on the book Oil by Upton Sinclair. I said oil because there's an exclamation point.
Ladies and gentlemen, if I say I'm an oil man, you will agree.
Yeah, it's all about oil, and it's all about this is a very, very Breaking Bad-esque movie as well, because you have this one character who starts from humble beginnings, I guess, and he kind of has this rise to creating this empire of oil and just trying to tear down everybody else who's his competitor. And
he doesn't stop for nothing. He
doesn't stop for nothing. He ends up basically everybody in his life. He just kind of, if you're against him or if you do anything stupid or whatever, if you're in his way, he's going to tear you down. He's going to drink your milkshake. So I really love this movie. I know you love this movie. Dill, what are your thoughts on this movie?
I adore this movie. I think it is one of the most brilliant, not to show my hand as to what my ranking is going to be, but I think it is one of the most brilliant things ever put to screen. I think what's so interesting is like I always look for characters I can like root for, and this film doesn't really have that, but at the same time the characters are just so intriguing that you can't look away from them, and you are invested in them even if they are some shitty people, because he is a shitty person, Daniel Plainview. He really is, but it's awesome.
Plainview.
It's so interesting to see how he gets his way with everything, and how he basically a lot of people say it's about a guy going mad, but I think you put it great. It's a guy going bad. I don't think he's going mad. I don't think he's losing his mind. If anything, his mind's getting sharper. He's getting more evil. He's finding ways to make himself come out on top no matter what. And even at the end, even when it seems like his life has gone to pieces, it really hasn't. He has the last laugh in everything. You think, when this pastor comes in and it's the only challenge he's ever had to face, and this pastor finally gets the one up on him, he ends up getting the final say and the final blow in the end. And I think that's just so brilliant because watching these two characters together, Paul Dano and Daniel Day-Lewis is the greatest actor of all time, in my opinion. And Paul Dano is doing work that is just as great and meeting him on his level. And that's so impressive to see.
Yeah.
But you really can, like No Country for Old Men, you can analyze this movie shot for shot, beat for beat, because every single scene has something to do with the overall motif and theme of, competition and capitalism and greed and hunger and anger and evilness and like just power. And every single scene, no matter how short or how long it is, builds to that whole. It always ties back to the central core and the theme of it. And I just think it's brilliant. I think it's brilliantly shot, scored. Chad, I'd love to hear what you have to say about the score because I think the music has a big effect to it. And I'll tell you why it didn't win or wasn't even nominated in a sec. But I just think it's brilliant. I think it's hard to talk about the movie and all the things I hate about it because there are none. And then even talking about the things I love, it's like I would just end up describing the whole movie, and we don't have 2.5 hours to do that. But I love this movie. I think it's brilliant. And Paul Thomas Anderson, it gets me more and more excited for whatever he puts out next, even if it isn't great. Usually it is, but I'm just always in the mood to see whatever he has to bring to the table because it is so distinct and interesting and unique.
Absolutely. Yeah. I love this director. I love the cinematographer. I love, pretty much everything about this movie. And the score, like I said, Johnny Greenwood, one of the greatest underrated guitarists of all time. This guy is ridiculous. They'll go out and he'll find like all the Andes Martinat, all of these like relic instruments from the past, like the freaking like 1800s, and he'll like bring these up on stage for a rock concert, and you have all these musicians from Radiohead are just like multi-instrumentalists, and that's what Johnny Greenwood's always doing. So he's got like the bongos, he's just going, so you can see why he's just so natural at being a composer.
And this score is very versatile as well. Like you can hear many different sounds. You have operatic stuff, classical stuff, you've got the drone type of stuff, and then just regular scoring, which is beautiful.
Yeah, and it just you can kind of see, like, it sets the tone a lot for this, where, the opening shot is just like the shot of like the nature, and, he's, practicing digging for the oil and all this stuff. And but you have these, like, I don't know what instrument it is, but it has this kind of like horror, like,
it's
strings
synth, right?
that come up, something like that.
Yeah.
But it's like this, it's hard to describe, but when you hear it, it sounds like it's opening a horror movie, and I love that. And then there's another, I forget where it is in the actual movie, but there's this other, like, kind of a fast-paced score, and it's very reminiscent. I'm like, this sounds like a Radiohead song right here, and that's a great thing, because it sounds like if you listen to the score for this movie and listen to the song "Burn the Witch" from A Moon-Shaped Pool, you'll hear a lot of similarities. I'm like, this is perfect. I love this so much.
The reason it wasn't nominated is because he does borrow, I think, a few things from some classical music. And also some of his own music, he does recycle some things from it, so it technically didn't qualify. I think of all the scores, this is probably the best score, but because he did borrow, because it wasn't an original score, it was an original score with added elements, it technically did not qualify, which is a shame because I think the music is so good, but that's why it didn't. But in our hearts, it is definitely number one. Yeah,
it is what it is, but that we both love it, so whatever. Anyways, yeah, so like I said, one of my favorite shows of all time is Breaking Bad, and like we said, the similarities between Walter White and Daniel Plainview are it's just a mirror image almost, basically, where he has this rise to making this empire, and he never stops, and it's just like he even like I would say the difference between this is that Walter White, you can tell, still always loves his family, but Daniel Plainview will stop for no one, not even his son. Like he ostracizes his son because I don't know, because his son's just not living up to what he thinks of as a son.
He almost uses his son as a prop, as like an advertisement to be like, to appeal to people, because he's like,
oh yeah,
you want to invest in my company? I got this cute kid. And then even when he does get deaf, and that one scene is a big climax, because in that moment you see him rush to his son, but then as soon as the flames shoot out, his focus goes right to the oil, and his son is not even near the front of his thought process.
Like, you're no longer useful to me.
he is not thinking about his son in that moment, and he is putting his work over his family, his only family he has that isn't really even his family, but he has adopted it to be his family. But it's hard, it's harrowing seeing him like looking at the fire, and everyone else is just like, hey, is your kid okay? And he's just eyes glued to the camera, to the fire. And it's really, really tragic to see, that he'd even throw away the one thing that we thought he might have cared about, which he really doesn't.
There's a whole ocean of oil under our feet. No one can get at it except for me.
And it's so heartbreaking too, because you want so much, you see that his son, HW, is like really trying, like later in life when he's like, I want to go start my own thing with my wife. And he's reaching out this one last time to his father, like, are you going to, accept me? Are you going to be there for us and, stuff? And he's like, you're going to be my competitor. And it's just like, oh my God. Okay. This guy is ridiculous, but it tracks. It's the whole time. Mm-hmm. And what I love about, what I love about Daniel Day-Lewis, and I know a lot of people have their differences of opinions on like method acting, because you have people like the Jared Leto's that kind of take it a little too far. But when you have people like Daniel Day-Lewis and like Jake Gyllenhaal, and they'll actually go and like for End of Watch, they'll go on a ride along and they'll do all these things to actually, like in Keanu Reeves, will go learn the trade and like learn how to actually perform as that actor. Daniel Day-Lewis, he takes it really far, but I think it works out. That's why every single time he's like nominated, and like you said, he's one of, if not the best actor of all time, because he will put himself in that role and he won't stop. Just like Daniel Plainview, he won't stop until he accomplishes his goal.
Right. And it's interesting because Phantom Thread, he does the same thing for, and then he quits acting to become a dressmaker, because he loved making dresses so much, because he learned how to do it. He learned the trade and he loved it.
So cool.
That's really interesting. You discover other passions through film, and this is an example of it. One thing I also wanted to touch on is just the difference, the contrast between light and dark. I love the use of shadow in this film. One of my favorite scenes is when he's at the table proposing the idea, and you have the dad on one side who's like kind of eating it up, and then the son, Paul Dano, on the other end. And when he turns to face Paul Dano, his face is lit, because Paul Dano sees everything. When he turns to the father, his whole face is in shadow, because he's basically masking himself in front of the father. So
very interesting.
Even in that one shot, you see that composition. And then another example is when he's sitting with the brother on the beach, and he realizes that his brother is not who he says he is. The brother has his head down and he's completely covered in shadow. And Daniel Day-Lewis is sitting in the light, because he is finally seeing what this lie is come to light. And it's really interesting how they use even visual motifs and metaphor like that to convey themes that aren't necessarily said. It's not like him going like, aha, I figured it out. Instead, you just see him sit up and he's in sunlight, and his brother is in the darkness, and right away you're like, oh, okay, yep, I get what's going on. And that's just brilliant. I love when you can use visual motif to convey stuff like that. This film is just so good. I love it.
And just like speaking of the visuals, not just like the cinematography itself, but just the practicalness of this movie, where they built these large oil rigs. Like there's no way to fake that. Like it's just such a great large scale, and just showing all that. It's just such a big, epic, bombastic movie. I love how they did all of this too. And
it's a shame it doesn't win production design, because I think it is, or art direction, because it is so well built. The oil, I have to look it up, but the oil just looks and emulates blood. And I know it's like There Will Be Blood. People were like, well, there wasn't much blood, but it's more of the idea of blood and getting blood on your hands, in terms of like basically soiling your relationships with people. And like the oil is a good metaphor for blood. Like when he's covered in the oil, staring at the fire while his son is discovering his hearing loss, and like I can't hear a thing, but he's drenched in this oil. It's like he's covered in blood, because at this point he's got blood on his elbows. He's so far gone and removed from any sort of empathy or human feeling. Yeah,
it's a great watch, even though it's on the longer side. It's the longest movie of these. It's still just so like you almost don't feel the length a lot of the times, because it's just so what's going to happen.
I agree. Aside from maybe Juno, I think this one moved the quickest for me, because I just loved. I was so engaged with it that by the time it's over, I'm like, that's it. Like, but it makes sense. It's a very fitting end. I did look it up. It lost to Sweeney Todd, which makes sense. Like Tim Burton is a stylistic director, but I would give it to this, I think. So There Will Be Blood is up for 8 nominations, like No Country for Old Men, but it only wins 2. It was nominated, of course, for Best Picture, for Best Director, PTA, Best Adapted Screenplay, Sound Editing, Art Direction, which, of course, as we said, lost to Sweeney Todd, and Best Film Editing, and it wins Best Cinematography over the great Roger Deakins. Maybe Roger Deakins split votes between himself. I'm wondering if that maybe be why this won, even though the cinematography is beautiful. I might need to sneeze. No, I don't. And it also won Best Actor for Daniel Day-Lewis. So it cleaned up 2 pretty big prestige categories, if you will. So those are the 5 movies. That was a lot of discussion, a lot of movies, a lot of long movies, a lot of deep movies, a lot of rich movies. But now it's time to
Great year.
rank them. Yeah. So
Oh,
Chad,
man.
this I think is one of the toughest years to rank, like 1975, like 1994. Like some of these years have just so many bangers after one another. So, Chad,
let me go
do you
ahead.
want to start, or you want to start?
Well, I can start, but let me preface this just by saying, this was the hardest time I think I've ever had trying to rank these movies because they're all so great. In my opinion, some better than others. I actually have the scale where I think 3 of them are S tier, 1 is A tier, and then 1 is B tier. And of course, that can change as I rewatch these movies, but that's where I'm at now. And so I can start if you want. My B tier movie is Atonement. That's my lowest.
My number 5, for the reasons I mentioned, is Michael Clayton. I just think I need a little bit more time to embrace it and analyze it, I think.
Interesting. My number 4 is my A tier, No Country for Old Men.
Interesting. Wow. That's actually lower than I thought you put it. My 4 is Juno. Very heartwarming. Just doesn't reach the depths of the top 3 for me. But what is your 3, Chad?
My 3, I was so you know what I mean? These are all it's getting into my S tiers. I think I'm just going to go ahead and put Juno as my 3.
Number 2 and number 3 I was really toying around with, but I think number 3 I'm going to put Atonement, only because I think directorially, I think my number 2 is a little smidge higher, but 2 really great movies. Atonement is my number 3.
For number 2, I'm going to have to go... I'll do it because I'm pretty sure what I know what's end up going to be our pick anyways. I'll put number 2, There Will Be Blood.
Wow. Okay. Interesting. And my number 2 is No Country for Old Men. And that means what is
my number 1 is Michael Clayton.
Wow. That's amazing. My
I
number
love
1
that
is
fucking movie.
There Will Be Blood. I pretty much alluded to it earlier. I think it's a perfect movie. If we're combining the scores, it was number 1 on mine, number 2 on yours. So There Will Be Blood is our pick for Best Picture of 2007. Again, like I said, so many good movies. But now we're going to get to our Best Actor and Best Actress prizes. I am going to start with Best Actor. And I think I kind of led on to this as well, but I'm going to go with Daniel Day-Lewis for There Will Be Blood. I think he is the best actor of our generation, maybe of all time, probably of all time, in my opinion. And I just love his performance. I think the I Drink Your Milkshake is the pinnacle of his career. And I think it's just a beautiful scene. I almost made that joke when you had the Tic Tacs, but I was like, we're a little too early. If we were segueing from Juno to There Will Be Blood, I would have made that joke, but we were not. But yeah, I eat your Tic Tac.
I drink your milkshake. I drink it up.
Well, I just want to say also, I love that you chose Daniel Day-Lewis because I really wanted to. And I know he deserves to be one of them. And I was like, but I really have to go with this other one. I have to go with Paul Dano. I mean, are you surprised? He's one of my favorite actors of all time. I love Paul Dano and everything. Nice. I can't wait till we get to Little Miss Sunshine and stuff like that because I don't know. For some reason, he's like a director now. He's a lot of things. And I just love him so much. And I just feel like you said before, Paul Dano, is Daniel Day-Lewis, even way before There Will Be Blood, has just cemented himself as one of the best, if not the best actor of all time. And Paul Dano, he's like this young guy, and he's able to hold his own. Yeah. And, I think in some ways outperformed Daniel Day-Lewis in some scenes, not the whole movie, maybe, but. Since you picked him there, I picked Paul Dano. My scene for Paul Dano is the sermon.
You will be cast up and thrust back to perdition.
Because he has a lot of range where he's he'll have these loud whatever, and then he'll just go I request that you let me come up and just say a little thing before you open up start your oil drilling. Mm-hmm. And I just love him in that movie. Range. Yep, absolutely.
So who is your best actress, Chad? I'd love to know.
This is another one that I have 2 that I'm between. I'm going to go with, I think she won. Tilda Swinton is kind of my favorite. She's so unlikable in this movie, but you understand her. The way she's so kind of not super confident. She's always just practicing her speeches and just going you see just shots of her getting ready, just waiting to trying to before she's going to have to go actually speak in front of a camera and people. Right. And then you just see her doing it perfectly when she is in front of the people. And then you see just all these scenes with where she's made these decisions to kill these people or almost kill George Clooney. And then you just see her in like the bathroom, just kind of like sweating, just anticipating like what's going to happen. And, and then the final scene, which is, like I said, one of my favorites of all time. And then just, her like, this isn't going to, we're already done. We're away. We've gotten away with this. And then, her defeat, just such a great performance. I love her.
Yeah.
Say it.
$10 million, your account, the moment this meeting is
Karen, everyone's waiting.
I'm coming, Don.
So my favorite performance, I kind of alluded to this earlier too, is Saoirse Ronan for Atonement. I think she is, one of our better actors of this generation. She has only gone on to bigger and better things, but this just shows her child performance too. This is just so layered, so complex. I think her character is so dynamic, like I said, with so many layers, having this lie that she's telling, but also kind of convincing herself to believe it, and then being able to, show her intelligence, but also like hide it from her adults, and like seeing just the look she gives different characters as she's kind of piecing everything together. It's just very, very engaging. And I think that's why the first half of Atonement is a little bit more solid than the second half, is because of her and the way she drives the narrative in that first half. I love that performance, and I think she is exceptional in it.
Yes, I saw him. I know it was him.
You know it was him?
I saw him with my own eyes.
So, our best picture between the two of us is There Will Be Blood. My best actor is Daniel Day-Lewis. Chad's is Paul Dano. My best actress is Saoirse Ronan, and Chad's is Tilda Swinton. So we have two Oscar winners amongst those four. One who was unfortunately snubbed, Paul Dano. I don't know why he didn't get nominated. Maybe because he was just more of an unknown. And then Saoirse Ronan, who was nominated at such a young age, which is very impressive and is hailed as one of the greatest child performances of all time by many critics. But that was 2007. Great year. Now we get to transition to, like I alluded to earlier, we're alluding a lot. We're doing a lot of foreshadowing in this episode. 1973. And there are two reasons why we're doing this. One is because Halloween's coming, and this was the first year a horror film was nominated for Best Picture. And we're also doing it because, like we talked about, 2007 was the worst, lowest viewed Oscars since this year. So it's going to be kind of cool to watch the two back to back. But those films are American Graffiti, Cries and Whispers, the horror film we alluded to earlier, The Exorcist, The Sting, which ended up winning that year, and A Touch of Class. So they're the five movies. Chad is holding up one of them, The Exorcist, and he's slowly pulling it away because we will be visiting that next month, and we are very, very excited for it. Chad, where can they find you on the internet?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously you can find me here on the great Dill Pickle Movie Network. Picture this. But you can also, I mean, I do a lot of trivia. I do rank them sometimes. I actually have my own kind of ranking show that I'm starting. Dill's appeared on it, and I'm trying to do more episodes with, more frequently and stuff like that, trying to schedule it and just trying to find our footing, really. We did episode of ranking Edgar Wright movies in anticipation for Last Night in Soho. I think we're going to try to do a Denis Villeneuve ranking soon, maybe a Harry Potter one. And then we also have thoughts of doing a bigger, and maybe Dill, you may be interested in this, a bigger MCU ranking, because that's a huge one. I know, but you've been seeing, I've been ramping up watching a lot more of these movies, again, and making some opinions about them, and maybe some hot takes. I'm not sure, but that's over at just my name, Chadwick Webb. So I mean, that's pretty much all I've been doing.
Great. And you can find me here at the Dill Pickle Movie Network. Of course, this show is exclusively video, so we do not have a podcast. You can only see it here on this channel with our faces. But I do have plenty of other shows and podcasts that you can check out. I have Marvelous Movie Mondays with Kelsey and Dill, where we talk about Marvel. I have other shows as well on the channel that are really, really exciting, including a new one that I just started called Recipe for Reality, where I talk about reality television because I love reality television. You can also find me on Twitter and Letterboxd at Dylan_Randazzo. My Letterboxd reviews for these films, as well as my films, as well as the films that we will be talking about next month, are all going to be there. So go check it out, especially with October approaching. I will be doing my 31 Days of Halloween reviews there as well, exclusively on Letterboxd. So thank you guys so much for checking out Picture This. We will see you next month for 1973 Halloween month. Ooh.